All right, all right. Hello, friendly neighborhood agitators. You are listening to Politics Off the Cuff here on Rainier Avenue Radio. Now, we have a special guest in the house today, and I know it's a little bit of digression from a little bit of a diversion from what I originally promised you. But in the I have the pleasure of speaking with Ari Hoffman, candidate for City Council District 2 down here in the South End. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Right on. So what I promised the listeners last week was that we were actually going to go through the documentary Seattle is Dying bit by bit, and I was going to do a little bit everything wrong with, we were even going to have a counter and stuff like that. But you are actually featured in the documentary, so this was rather fortuitous that we can have you on and kind of go through each of those points and get your point of view. So without further ado, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So would you like to start with the part in the documentary, or you want to start with just my background?
Let's start with you as a person before all the screaming and the I want kind of like an epic crossover between like Fox News and MSNBC one day. Like, I'm not saying you're Fox News. What I'm saying is that before Avengers Endgame, it would actually be. I would love to see that.
Wouldn't that be more Civil War than Avengers Endgame?
But that's the thing. I don't think like Rachel Maddow is gonna give Tucker Carlson a cell phone at the end and saying, "Whenever you need me, you can call me. We may disagree on alternative facts, but I'll be there." I just don't see that happening. Yeah, no, it'd be a bit more Infinity War.
Gotcha.
Just like equally as tragic in as. I would say an equal amount of CGI.
As long as nobody dies at the end, we're okay, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was about to say it's Fox News, MSNBC.
Oh, did I just spoiler that for everybody? I'm sorry. If you haven't seen Infinity War yet, that's how it ends.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am originally from New York. I moved here 15 years ago. My wife, good. You, me.
Right.
My wife is fourth generation Seattle. Came back here to start a family, start a business. Love it here. I absolutely love it. I love the weather. I love the climate. I love that you can drive to go to any climate you really want nearby. There's snow nearby. There's beaches nearby. There's desert nearby, as we were just talking about. There's so many great places to go. I love the pace of life here. I just love it. I loved all the opportunities that were here. I love that housing was affordable when I moved here. There's so many great things about coming out here. I was actually excited to leave the East Coast and come out here. So that's
because of clean air, huh?
Oh, the air didn't really bother me. I have allergies no matter where I go, so that didn't really.
That's true. That's true.
So that didn't really change much there.
Right.
Yeah.
Longer lifespan's nice and not hopefully a bit more aggressive in the next couple years. We're just talking about the quality of driving in Seattle.
Quality of driving is a little bit more challenging. It's like everybody's united to sit in traffic for as long as they possibly can, and I'm the guy trying to get around them as quickly as possible.
You're not the only one.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that we can definitely agree on. So one thing I just wanted to go into straight off the jump. So your candidacy has been rather unique. So you have been described as a conservative in the race here in District 2. As we were discussing before the interview, you've been called Trumpian. A rather derogatory irony to people, even calling you a Nazi, given your pride in your Jewish heritage, things like that, right? But still, your candidacy is controversial because, at least beyond the craziness, right? In part because your position on homelessness and crime and safety.
Why do you call it controversial?
I was actually going to ask. So, why do you think, critics have called your positions controversial? And, what are some of the top line parts of your platform that you think people really need to understand?
First off the bat, I think way more people have been supportive of the campaign than derogatory towards the campaign. The majority of comments and feedback I get are overwhelmingly positive. And this isn't campaign stuff. This predates the campaign when I was fighting to protect the Jewish cemeteries in Seattle that were being desecrated by drug dealers and prostitution and other acts of vandalism that cost $300,000 to our cemetery. That's how I got involved in all this. And so many people came from so many diverse backgrounds, so many different races and cultures, so many different sides of the political aisle to support our efforts that the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. There were a few naysayers back then. For example, one of the first comments I ever saw online was, we should bulldoze the Jewish cemeteries, and we should pave them over and turn them into homeless encampments. That was one of the first comments I ever saw. And that was directed at me and my co-religionists, and it was appalling. This is something that happened during World War II, during the Holocaust. Nazis actually took Jewish graves and used the headstones to create roads. And in Israel, it actually happened in Jerusalem when the Jordanians had part of the old city of Jerusalem. They took Jewish cemeteries and did the exact same thing. So this is something that happened in our history that now people are trying to attribute to Seattle, and it's a really, really horrible state of affairs. So people will say whatever they want to say because they don't see it fitting with their narrative. They don't see it fitting with their agenda. And unfortunately, there's a few people on social media who are very, very loud who want to keep saying that kind of stuff with no basis for it whatsoever.
So speaking of social media, well, actually, I just want to move back a little bit.
Sure.
To your position on homelessness, right? Because in the documentary you're in, one of the big criticisms was that the documentary conflated homelessness with crime, insofar as that there are people who do criminal acts who are homeless, but there are plenty of people that commit criminal acts that have a place to, to go at night. So in that case, feel free to bring some numbers. We'll compare notes, but what is your position exactly on homelessness? And would you say that not all the homeless are criminals and drug users and so on and so forth?
I've never said anything of that nature.
Right.
So this was something I was reading an article in New Yorker magazine. It was a fantastic article that somebody sent me. It was actually discussing the broken windows policy. And I know that's not the most popular thing, and people have a lot of issues with it.
Can you explain what it is?
Absolutely. So broken windows is a thing that was kind of grabbed out of a larger discussion, a larger policy, right? But they grabbed that because it was the most thought-provoking and, I guess, catchy part of it, where it discusses that if you leave an area unattended, and a bad thing happens there and you don't do anything about it, worse things happen. Now, I could tell you from my property management experiences, I have a fraternity house that I manage. And if there's a hole bashed in a wall, if I don't fix it the very next day, there's going to be 3 holes bashed in the wall right after that.
Although haven't a number of, well, no respect, but what is your response to a number of urban planners, a number of people in the know on policy that have essentially said that that was a broken theoretical model?
Oh, I'm not talking about the theory. I'm talking about my own. This is my own. This is my own personal experience. The article in New Yorker. The article in New Yorker is going to address that.
Well, okay.
So the article in New Yorker had a great line from it, which said, "We think of crime as being about bad people doing bad things. A lot of crime is situational. If you create a city with lots of places where no one is in control and no one feels a sense of responsibility, and people have a hard time managing things, you create situations where crime is more likely. If you take away these situations, crime just doesn't happen."
So what does that mean?
So if you look at it this way, a lot of crimes happen because there is need, motive, and opportunity. That's a lot of the reasons behind crime.
Define need, motive, and opportunity.
So let's think about it this way. Let's say somebody gets fired from their office on a Friday. Just for sake of argument, why do we have security escort them out? Right there, they're going to be upset at the company they got fired from. They may want to take something from the office. They may have the motive because they're upset that they got fired from the office that day. And they have the opportunity because what are they going to do with them afterwards?
I mean, to be fair, you just write a Yelp review and that's it,
Yeah, you can do that too. It's a new generation.
Well, that... Office Space was a good movie, but I don't think you're going to have people burning down an office because of a stapler.
I love that movie. That's a great movie. I don't think he burned it down because of that. The stapler was just one aspect of it.
But it still spoke a lot to our post-industrial decline. But I'm sorry.
I love the movie references. That's great. Yeah.
No, we try to have fun.
He was upset because he got moved down to the basement. The stapler was just an added bonus.
Well, that's the thing. The stapler was a symbol of all of that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And Swingline just started making the red staplers. They didn't make them before that movie.
Oh.
Yeah. A little movie trivia for you.
I didn't know that.
There you go.
Yeah.
So anyway, with regards to what you were saying, is that if you look at what's going on in Seattle, if we talk about the drug crisis, the drug addiction crisis that we have on the streets right now, A lot of the people who have this addiction problem, their rap sheets are because they are funneling into their addiction. They are fueling their addiction. They steal so they can feed their addiction. That's not right. We can't have that happening. We want to get these people treatment. Mental health. These people may not even know what they're doing, what's going on. We want to get those people treatment. That is what we need to address. That's what we need to solve. That's where our efforts should be going. We need to invest in treatment options for these people to help them. I was reading a study recently that said that 78% of people who are on heroin want to be off heroin. So shouldn't we be providing them the resources to get clean and make sure that they have a more helpful, fruitful, prosperous life?
So in that case, what was it? So in that case, are you a supporter of safe consumption sites?
I have a real issue with safe consumption sites, and I'm against them right now. I'm going up to Vancouver to East Hastings because I want to see them for myself. I want to check them out for myself, and the closest one is Vancouver. So I'm driving up there. Another example is I'm going down to San Diego, and I'm going to look at the car parks there and see what they do with the homeless car parks.
With that, there have been a number of studies, though, and I'm talking about this as, from our own drug enforcement agency and, government authorities in Canada and I mean, you can find them yourself, where it's shown that the folks that go to the safe consumption sites more often than not, I forget the percentage, but more often than not, they're able to find treatment and they eventually get clean.
It also shows that the area around safe consumption sites, that the overdose death rate has gone up 1,000%.
Well, those are the folks that don't use it. In the safe consumption sites, there hasn't been one overdose death.
You're a pop culture guy. Does anybody ever die at Disneyland?
But wait, hold on. We can go on about the media empire of Disney. And in fact, we actually, little shameless plug, we did a little thing on media consolidation recently. But still, there's been no deaths linked to safe consumption sites. In fact, when those that, and this kind of goes with the opioid and the meth crisis, which you have a section on your website, that the overdose deaths, those that have, those that have overdosed in the cities, in these broader communities, are folks that don't use the sites. On the other hand, these sites have been shown to produce positive results.
So then why has the area around the site had such a rise in the overdose deaths? They weren't there before the site went in.
Let me ask you another thing. That why exactly do we see positive results from people that actually go to the sites?
So from my experience, from the people I'm talking to, because I'm going to people who are in rehab, who are in addiction therapy, who are in recovering therapy, and every single one of them says that this was enabling behavior. Nobody has told me that this kind of stuff helped them out. Now, that's why I'm continuing my research. I wouldn't be going up to East Hastings if I had a solid decision.
So how many are you talking to?
I've been to 4 groups so far, and I'm
4
going
groups
to
of
more.
How many?
One had 200 people, one had 50 people, one had 10 people.
So which percentage of those folks, I don't know if this is documented anywhere, what percentage of those folks say it was enabling versus...
Every person I spoke to.
You sure about
Every
that?
single person I spoke to, it doesn't mean every person who was there.
Yeah.
Every person I spoke to said that kind of stuff was enabling behavior.
So forgive me for being the nitpicky scientist, social scientist, but just as you said, that's people you spoke to. I can speak to 5 people in a room of 500. It doesn't mean it's necessarily statistically sound. And from the thousands of people in the studies I've seen, it seemed actually. So let me say this and get on to my next question because I don't want to take up too much time because we have a limited amount of time. By the way, if you're just tuning in, we are listening to Politics Off the Cuff you are listening to Politics Off the Cuff here on Rainier Avenue Radio. I'm having a very engaging conversation with Ari Hoffman, candidate for Seattle City Council District 2. And also, full disclosure, as you may know, that I'm supportive of one of your opponents. So I just wanted to make that full disclosure just so.
That's fine because I'll talk to anybody about it, even if they disagree with me, because the goal is to be the representative for the entire district.
That being said, to cap off my other point, given those studies and given the daunting size of a lot of the challenges that we face, do you think it's really productive to operate on what some people criticize as a platform based on people's fears, right? And I'm particularly, and so I mentioned Seattle is dying before the quote unquote documentary that Como News had on where you were prominently featured. And a number of people criticize that as conflating essentially real data and conflating and also overblowing a lot of the real issues that surround both the homelessness crisis and also the heroin opioid crisis. So, what is your response to that? And also, is it, do you feel like that you're maybe fanning the fears that people have in order, in your platform
I don't
that may or
agree
may
that
not be
I'm running
founded?
on a platform of fear at all. I'm bringing awareness to a situation that I experienced, the situations that I'm dealing with. Those things. It's not a culture of fear. I'm trying to bring awareness to help these people because we need to get them off the streets and into treatment.
So with that, the flip side of that is, so before this, when I was an anti-eviction and housing justice advocate, there were there were a series of homelessness sweeps. And many activists down here, and actually District 2, we were really active in standing up and protesting these sweeps. And from a number of the homelessness people in the camps that I was able to talk to and work alongside, this was a reign of terror for them, if you will, because these were areas where they were able to be sedentary, things like that. So, since, many of these folks, some one or two, well, a few that I know of have been able to find shelter since then. And for some of these folks that they're still around here, with informal support networks, how would you represent them, if you are able to win this seat?
Nobody wants the sweeps happening. People shouldn't be living on the streets. People should be in treatment. The sweeps are happening because what's all this, if you look at what's being found by the navigation team, we put this up on my Facebook page of what's being found in there. You're finding weapons, you're finding drugs, you're finding children. Washington State is the 13th highest in the country for child trafficking and for human trafficking. And we're finding 30% of children, 30% of the people in the jungle were children that we find
So,
in these sweeps.
well, yes, there are children, there are a number of families. I'm sure you're aware that there's an eviction crisis going on.
I'm aware that people are being evicted from their homes, and we want to make sure that
So,
people have their homes.
that being said, that these aren't, young, hip, tall, dark, and handsome millennials, like myself, right? Many of these folks are families. And on the human trafficking part, something that not a lot of people talked about, but issue that I'm passionate about, that human trafficking more often than not, occurs in seemingly middle class areas,
But we
right?
saw we saw in Chinatown what was going on when they raided all
So
the massage parlors.
well, you have massage parlors in a number of suburban strip malls and things like that.
I'm not saying we don't, but do we? Nobody
So
should be in
my
slavery in those
oh
areas.
well,
Yeah.
obviously. So my question for you though is, where are you going to prioritize? Where would you prioritize our resources in terms of the police investigations, things like that? Because as much as we're talking about these homeless encampments, and as much of their was this image, if you will, just going back to the Como news report, Seattle's dying, that everyone from Mayor Durkin to myself to a bunch of people push back against, that when it comes to over-the-counter drugs and those that are abused, right, opiates, that all over, in many homes throughout Seattle, that you're finding this kind of abuse, right? Not homeless encampments. When it comes to when it comes to child trafficking, again, that you have a lot of low wage industries that are either intentionally or unintentionally becoming a party to people who are in involuntary servitude, who are enslaved. And on top of that, we have an eviction crisis, in which children are frequently caught in in unsafe situations. So, given all that, where would you feel comfortable? Uh, as a city council member, if you are elected, in directing our resources towards.
Are you talking about, you asked the question several ways. Are you asking the police resources or the overall financial resources?
Police resources, and then let's talk about financial resources.
Right now, we have a bigger problem with the police resources, where the police are operating at 60% of capacity in Seattle. We don't have enough police in this town. If you look at the Jewish community, we rely on them. When the shooting happened in Pittsburgh, all of a sudden the police were activated and came zipping over to every single synagogue in town. And we didn't know what was going on because we can't use our phones on the Sabbath. So we had no clue why the cops were showing up all of a sudden. We need them for protection. There were times in the Jewish history in Seattle where the cops wouldn't come into our neighborhoods because things were so bad. And we needed their protection. We needed their help. Conversely, I understand how in other communities, people look at the cops and they look at them with fear. And that's because they don't understand not they don't understand, but there's a misunderstanding of the relationship. They don't feel like they're part of their community.
Of course not.
There's Officer Cookie, who I don't know if you've met her before.
Oh, no,
She's
I
wonderful.
know her,
Yeah, and she plays chess with the kids. We need more cops who are part of the communities, being part of the community so people feel safe around them. So they have the same relationship that my community does, where we count on them and look to them for help, where we were begging for their help out at the cemeteries because we needed it so bad, because the graves of our relatives are being desecrated.
So, really quick, would you support place-based solutions versus hard enforcement style solutions to crime and safety in the South End?
Well, the question comes into is that, are we talking about diversion programs, or are we talking about crimes where we actually have real problems that need to be addressed?
Well, preventative programs.
Right, no, I understand.
You mentioned Officer Cookie, and one of the things and you mentioned her chess games and whatnot, and one of the things. So there's a framework that is currently being pioneered in Rainier Beach right now, which I've done some considerable work on that framework. Place-based intervention strategies where improving the space before in order to prevent crime. So as a way to de-emphasize enforcement, because conversely, if you come to my neighborhood in the kind of like Rainier Beach area, and hell, if we take a ride down the street, we could find some police officers very easily.
So I live down the street. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Wait, whereabouts?
Huh? You go that way, make a left on Graham, and that's where I live. So go that direction.
No, okay. Wait, is it up the hill?
It's up the hill.
So is it up and over the hill?
It's up and not quite over.
Not quite. Okay, I think I know. Okay, yeah.
You come for barbecue sometime. You come for dinner sometime. We'd love to have you.
I'd appreciate that.
No problem. Kosher stuff. Yeah, different style.
Oh, I can dig it.
Yeah.
Well, I eat halal a lot, and I am not that much into. Is it kosher? Forgive me for asking. Is kosher without pork, or
it's a little bit more complicated, but it's basically without pork. It's a little bit stricter version of halal.
Okay, cool. I'm not familiar with that, so thank you.
But to answer your question, is that for me, I am where I am because I had mentors in my life, because I had teachers that reached out and did work with me when I was having some rough times in my childhood. If you invest in a community, you give them the resources they want to better their community. Community centers. This is just what I did with the Jewish community. I built them a youth center at one of the synagogues so that the kids would have a place to go rather than being in the parks nearby. If you invest in the communities and play spaces like you're talking about, you're going to have a better community, and you won't have as much need for the police department, because it goes back to that motive, opportunity, and the areas that are abandoned is where people use to do these bad things, like our cemetery. Nobody's there at night, so they took advantage of that and did the bad things there because nobody's hanging out there at night.
So on that, one of the big, I won't say controversies, but stories I've heard about in the last couple of days. The city has decided to extend the permits for a number of the tiny homes, homeless villages, basically, as a strategy to prevent homelessness, right? So would you support more of those tiny homeless villages in the district?
The biggest problem I have right now is who's operating those tiny home villages.
Would you, though?
I'm not answering your question. I'm not dodging your question. I'm answering your question.
No, I know.
This is what it is. Right now, the people who are operating those programs like Share and Wheel have a lot of accusations against them, and I'm very concerned about the way they're being operated. Look at what happened at Licton Springs.
Although on the front end, though, I know you're getting to the explanation, but just before the longer explanation, yes or no?
It's not a yes or no question, and I'm not dodging you because I'm trying to explain my position on this.
Well, I mean, the management we can sort out,
No,
right?
because not just that. Nobody should be in a tiny home if we can get them real housing solutions. And I think we'd all agree that nobody should be living like that if we have better options. I would rather have people in better options than little shacks that are used for gardening equipment.
But would you support building them though? And I mean, the city, as you may know, they award contracts to different organizations, different nonprofits to manage them,
and they take them away as well, which they've been doing with a lot of the tiny home villages.
But
right
nevertheless, the question that the city is facing is: should we have these? Should we have these at all?
The question is that the city thinks that, or sorry, the answer is that the city thinks that they're economical. And it's not a matter of economy. It's a matter of how are you going to help these people. And I don't believe that you see in any of the studies the transition of these people into permanent housing from these things. You see people who are living there for months or years at a time. We need real long-term housing solutions for these people, not shacks in encampments.
So in that case, my question for you is, and I know we're running a little bit out of time, is to go a little bit far afield and actually farther than I've had a conversation I've had with a number of candidates. Would you support a social housing model being implemented similar to as they do in Western Europe or as they've done in Salt Lake in order to address the homeless crisis?
I think what we need to do is we need to look at so many different options. I've seen good options in Asia. I've seen amazing things that they do in other cities like New Orleans and Salt Lake City.
Or...
I say, let's find out what the facts are, because right now the studies are skewed all over the place with this stuff. I want to get all the data on it.
It's concrete. And I can feel the cane from the Apollo being yanked right now. But
as long as it's not the guy with the siren, then we're okay.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. When we're able to have more of a roundtable debate in the future, fingers crossed, start campaigning for it, folks, and bring in a number of your opponents and have a kind of a rousing conversation. We can touch back on this point.
Anytime. But anyway, say when, I'll be there.
Thanks for coming. And this has been Politics Off the Cuff here on Rainier Avenue Radio. Remember, keep agitating, never back down.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
You can do it, bump or you just go.